Let's talk about formatting charts. I'm going to take an example of data that we've pulled from the web, which has the Internet Movie Database's top 250 movies, ranging from rank 1 to rank 250. And each of these movies have been given votes, which range from, well, few, 30,000 or 40,000 all the way up to 9 lakhs, and have a variety of ratings ranging from 4 all the way up to 9. Now this can be visualized in a number of ways. One classic way of representing this is using a scatter plot. If you go to the insert menu and select scatter as a chart type, we get a chart which I'm going to paste onto a new sheet and zoom out a bit so you'll be able to see all of it. Now this chart is by default not formatted too bad, but you can certainly improve the style of formatting considerably. To begin with, let's get rid of this rating. You know that the title is ratings, so this is superfluous. Let's take each of these points. They are diamonds by default, and that isn't necessarily the most pleasing shape. Sharp edges tend not to work too well. So I'm going to right click on this and select Format Data Series. You can choose what marker you want. There are a variety of marker options. Automatic puts in diamonds, none puts in none. But the most flexible one is where you can choose a built-in marker type, and that offers a series of pre-built markers. You can also choose your own picture, but what we're going to do is select circles, which usually look nice. These circles are pretty large. We can adjust the size so that they look a little better. I'm going to leave it at size 3 for now. Yeah, size 3. Now you'll notice that it looks a little more pleasing. These grid lines tend to take up too much attention. Let's format them. Now we certainly want grid lines, but we don't want them to be as strong. So you can pick a lighter color. I tend to pick a mild shade of gray. Let's pick the lightest shade of gray, or the second lightest, and that makes the grid lines a lot more muted. Um, the grid lines exist for the horizontal axis but don't exist for the vertical axis. So let's add the grid lines and format them exactly the same way, which is with a solid line. And now you have a grid of sorts. Now typically these grids look more pleasing when they are square-like, and what we have is data that's in multiples of 2 lakhs. What if we made that multiples of 1 lakh? So the major unit, instead of being 2 lakhs, let's change that to 1 lakh. The trouble is that overlaps. Well, there's no reason why we need to show all of the numbers. Let's go back to formatting and select the display units to be thousands. So now we have 100,000, 200,000, and so on, and these cells are more square-like, which makes things a little more appealing. It also makes it easier to quickly trace back what exactly certain values are. You'll notice that there's a lot of overlap in these cells here, in these markers. Now that doesn't quite give us a picture of whether there was just one movie here or there were a whole bunch of movies. One useful way of fixing that is to select a semi-transparent fill. The marker fill right now is automatic. Let's change that to a solid fill. It stays blue, but I'm going to increase the transparency to about 50%. Now you'll notice that they've become a little transparent here. You can see through these cells, but the borders are not transparent, and that is a little jarring. So let's go to the marker line color, and make sure that the markers don't really have a border, or even if they do, the border can be transparent as well, and we'll give that a transparency of maybe 30%. So that 33%. So that makes it slightly darker, but still not so dark that we can't see through it. And you'll notice that there's a big cluster of movies here, whereas these represent just one movies. Even if there's a perfect overlap of movies across, you'd still be able to you'll be able to make sense out of it. This in fact makes it easier to understand when you start adding regression lines. So if I add a trend line here, now for people to understand why it is that it's getting weighted below here so much, this dense cluster makes it easier to understand the reason for the lower weightage. Now let's see if there's any pattern that we can spot amongst these movies. For example, are there any outliers? Are there movies that are rated very high but not watched very often, or vice versa? For that, an easy way is to look at the line, look at the values that are as far away from the regression line as possible. Let's take this one. There's a movie that's been rated 9.2, which is fairly high rating, and has been watched by about 6,74,000 people, which is not too bad, to be fair. Let's go even further. This one is a movie that's been rated 8.9, which is a rather good rating, but it's been watched only by 2 lakh movies. Trouble is, Excel's scatter plots don't quite let you figure out what that movie is directly by hovering over it. So we'll have to go back to the data and see what movie has a rating of to 8.9 and is seen by about 2.3 lakh people. Um, for this, conditional formatting tends to make it a little easier to spot. What I'm going to do is take all the votes and highlight them on a red, yellow, green color scale and do exactly the same thing for the ratings as well. Now, of the movies with an 8.9 rating, is there anyone that looks surprisingly low? Well, this one does, 12 Angry Men, and that's got exactly the same number of votes that we looked at earlier, 2.31 lakhs. It's a 1957 movie, so which probably explains why, even though people have rated it really high, it's not got that many viewers. Let's look for the opposite. Is there a really bad movie, or at least rating wise, a movie that hasn't done so well that's extremely popular? This looks like one. There's a movie that's got a rating of 8, which is not too bad but not all that high either, but it's still been watched by 4.5 lakh people. Let's see what that is. A rating of 8, and let's move down up to 8. And is there a movie that's got a rather high viewership here? This one looks the greenest, Pirates of the Caribbean, and being a Disney movie, given the amount of marketing that they do, and also being a movie that's watchable by the family, that's quite understandable. In fact, there's a huge differentiation based on the genre of movies. Some kinds of movies, typically dramas, tend to have relatively high ratings but poor viewership, whereas animation movies consistently have higher ratings and disproportionately high viewership. Most Disney movies fall into that category. This representation of the same chart that you'd seen earlier is a lot cleaner than the default representation. Don't stick to the default representations as far as you can. There's absolutely no reason why the default representation would tell the story that you want to tell. Invariably, you want to focus people's attention on the message that you want to convey, and that would almost without doubt require tweaking. Excel provides all of those options. You can tweak the axis, you can tweak the grid lines, you can tweak the cells, you can add trend lines, you can tweak the trend lines formatting itself, and all of this is using a reasonably simple interface. So you don't really have any excuse to not do that. Make sure that every single chart is custom formatted.